There are unprecedented efforts to create a system of global governance. And I think the dichotomy that they're trying to make, and I again think it's a false dichotomy, is we can either have the current existing unipolar world order, Western dominated, or have this multipolar world order.
In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever.
Dominated by the BRICS countries, and of course within BRICS, the dominant countries are Russia and China. It's being framed even, upon independent media. There's some people that claim that the multipolarity model is better because it's more inclusive and more countries have a voice. But ultimately, the same 2030 agenda or Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals embraced by the EU and the Biden administration, what have you, are also embraced by the BRICS countries that are supposed to represent a challenge to the Western order. So maybe there's a few more seats at the table under the multipolar world order, but in terms of the world that will come in through it, it's the same as if the unipolar world order continues on its way, essentially. Larry Fink is in this group too, and he doesn't, to think that he wants to make a more inclusive world is insane. He's interested in increasing the amount of assets that BlackRock manages, and pretty much only that.
Today, Whitney Webb provides insights into BlackRock's strategy for 2024, alerting us to the unexpected shifts ahead. She cautions us that the elite figures and major corporations at the helm, including Larry Fink, Jamie Dimon, and other banking titans, are not operating with the public's best interests at heart. Webb unveils their hidden agendas, highlighting their efforts to dominate Bitcoin, stablecoins, and a vast array of financial assets in an unprecedented grab for control. This significant maneuver by the financial elite signals a critical moment as Whitney Webb raises the alarm about the current developments and their unparalleled nature in history. Join us as we dive into the video with Whitney Webb, who will share her predictions for the immediate future, shedding light on the impending changes and challenges.
The Sustainable Development Goals have been developed essentially by bankers. You could describe it, or I would describe it, as a global Wall Street coup, essentially, but transnational finance. You have people like Mark Carney, former Goldman Sachs, former head of Bank of England, Bank of Canada, Financial Stability Board, aider and abetter of HSBC's money laundering for drug cartels. He's the person that's in charge of climate action for the United Nations. Their other point man is Mike Bloomberg, former Salomon Brothers, former mayor of New York, billionaire guy. And if you think these people care about the environment and sustainable development and building a more inclusive world, I'm sorry, but you have been had. So these are the people that are essentially behind a lot of the net zero plans, behind a lot of the other SDG plans that essentially move us from the model, the free market capitalist model, into more this technocratic model where, every commodity, everything is going to be tokenized. And you've seen Larry Fink in the past couple of days be very open about that, following the approval of the BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, for example, talking about the tokenization revolution and all of this. But there's an effort here to take this, much farther than it's ever been taken before, and to essentially just not just tokenize, existing assets or traditional assets, but also create new asset classes like natural assets, all these natural asset corporations that have sort of been in the news lately and have sort of, received some pushback. But there's definitely a lot of efforts underway to essentially tokenize the whole planet, increase the amount of assets in the existing economy by being like, now this lake is an asset, now this forest is an asset, and all of this stuff, tokenize, fractionalize it, and basically create this insane new financial system that's different than previous financial systems. But everything, including nature and humans, will be tokenized and traded like financial products. And that's essentially what a lot of this is leading to. And you have most of the countries on the world, those that are pursuing Agenda 2030, essentially leading us into that. And so, at some level, I think the geopolitical push and pull between, BRICS and the West is real. But I think, at the higher levels, they ultimately agree on the goals. So I don't really think one is necessarily a true effective challenge to the other. And if you're against the ambitions of the SDGs and Agenda 2030, then you should be against them regardless of if they're being championed by Russia and China or the United States and the EU. Ultimately, it leads us to the same place. which is going to financialize and tokenize everything, but also surveil everything to an unprecedented extent, and increasingly uses, debt slavery. The Mark Carney and Fink and all of these guys, under the auspices of the UN, talked about reimagining the World Bank and the IMF, all the multilateral development banks, for the purpose of basically using debt to finance the SDGs and doing all these things like debt for climate swaps, debt for nature swaps, which are essentially, land grabs and all sorts of things, framing it as, necessary to save the planet.
Webb anticipates a looming economic disaster triggered by the collapse of fiat currencies, soaring inflation, and widespread bank failures. She believes that adopting a Bitcoin standard could emerge as a viable solution as the world confronts this impending crisis. Webb criticizes the Federal Reserve and central banks for their empty assurances, which have resulted in rampant money printing and a surge in unwise investments. Following the recent inflation spike, Webb argues that a simple return to the status quo is unlikely.
And maybe that justification works for the left, but I think it would be naive to assume that they aren't going to retool the talking points to appeal to the right. I think that's definitely going to be happening. And if you look at Fink himself, he's tried to go away from being the point man for ESG and all of this towards a guy that's saying, like, look how profitable this is going to be for us. And you can have a part of the riches by tokenizing your land and putting it on this platform where it can be traded and whatever. Like, you can have a piece of all this wealth and whatever. I think that's how they're going to try and frame it. And I think people need to be very, very aware, because, the efforts to manipulate us to acquiesce to this system are unprecedented. And I think ultimately, if you have a good grasp of what they want to enact on the global stage, regardless of the justifications or the political figures they use or influencers and media that they try to use to sell this to you, if you are firm in your opposition to these agendas, then you'll be able to sort through the nonsense. Because, as you said, all the stuff coming out online is increasingly just so psyop after psyop after psyop. And, it's hard to know who to trust and who to believe, what have you. But if you know that the end goal is global governance, mass surveillance, the end of privacy, all of that, you can look at who is pushing those agendas and say no. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to say no. You have to know what your red lines are, and you have to make it about trusting your red lines and trusting where you stand, not so much trusting this political savior or that political savior or this media influencer, which I think a lot of people have been doing. And I think it's definitely time for another model, particularly when it comes to US presidential politics, because how many times can we vote for the lesser of two evils and have a good outcome? It's never happened, and it's not going to keep happening. And, all of these efforts, in the case of Trump, to explain away his decisions last time and act like it's going to be different this time. We can't wait to see what's going to happen this time. The situation has come to a head arguably already, and it's up to people to find local solutions and build something with their communities that will help them help everyone in that community protect themselves against all these stressors and crises that are to come. Because waiting for the right guy to get in the White House, regardless of who he is and whatever intention and motivation he has, one guy in the White House is not going to solve all of this, because arguably, the president is really a figurehead, because at this point, the US is so bureaucratic and massive. It doesn't really matter who gets elected, every 4 years in a November. The agenda is going to continue. And I think people need to really get wise about that. And particularly now where, presidential politics is pushed to the forefront of both mainstream and independent media, it's increasing. It really has been for some time a circus at the end of the day. And I think we should be paying attention to these really real issues and increasingly focus on solutions, which I think, finds very little airtime in independent media these days, which I think is definitely a trend I'd like to see reversed, because it's definitely time to start building something parallel to this Agenda 2030 2030 stuff. A lot of the way this digital ID stuff, CBDCs or their private sector equivalents are going to be forced onto the people is when, the food supply is under attack, or, there's some sort of crisis there. And the only way to get your rations is to follow the same model that's been rolled out by the UN's World Food Program, which is essentially the same model produced by Sam Altman's WorldCoin. Scan your eyeball and you have a digital ID tied to your eyeball in a digital wallet. And every time you check out, you scan your eyeball at the cash register and it deducts the money of the cost of what you purchased from your, rations wallet. And if you don't submit to that system, you don't eat. And the World Food Program does this to millions of refugees every day in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and elsewhere. And the plan is to have this happen essentially everywhere. So people need to be very vigilant.
Webb cautions against the infiltration of powerful financial entities like BlackRock into the cryptocurrency arena, highlighting it as a decidedly adverse turn of events for the sector. She argues these institutions are poised to dominate a considerable share of the cryptocurrency market, underscoring the need to stand against such evident market manipulation. Webb predicts an imminent economic turmoil triggered by the collapse of traditional fiat currencies, soaring inflation, and banking sector failures. She proposes that a shift towards a Bitcoin standard could emerge as a viable solution as the global economy faces these challenges. Webb critiques the empty assurances from the Federal Reserve and other central banks, which have led to rampant money printing and a surge in suboptimal investments. Following the recent spike in inflation, she contends that there won't be a simple return to normalcy. What are your thoughts on her Bitcoin forecast and the direction we're heading in the first half of 2024? Drop your comments below. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next video.